Police officers of Reddit, have you ever had an all units call? And if so, what happened? Please like, subscribe and comment so I can create more videos for you. I was doing a ride along in college in a fairly small city in GA when we got an all available units call. The address came in, the lights and siren went on, and we were hauling ass at about 120 mph across town. I had no idea where we were headed until we got there. The only thing the officer said to me was, no matter what happens, stay in the fucking car. If you see anyone with a gun, call it out on the radio like this. Showed me, dart. If any of us get shot, call it in and stay in the car. Then, he took a deep breath, calmly got out of the car, and took off at a sprint towards a 40-person melee in front of the only strip club in town. We were the first car there. Over the course of the next 30 seconds, officers arrived and kept coming until they outnumbered the people fighting. The officer I was riding with was completely on his own for a 10-second eternity and was able to rip about 10 people apart from fighting before backup arrived. It was the single bravest and most humbling thing I've ever seen with my own eyes. When it was all over, he got back in the car with 3 drunk and beaten up dudes in the back, turned to me and said, "So when you gonna sign up? I've got a couple more stories from that summer doing ride-alongs if anyone wants to hear." 25 years ago, smallish rural town, my dad is a beat cop on patrol. My cat brings in a live mouse and is playing with it in the kitchen, and my mom is deathly afraid of rodents. So she calls dispatch and tells them my dad needs to come home. Dispatch gets on the line and tells my dad to switch to a secured line. There's an emergency at home. My dad's driving home to take care of the issue when all of the cops, probably like 4, of my small town on patrol, come with sirens and lights blazing on my house because all they heard was there was an emergency at my dad's house. My mother was mortified. This reminds me of something similar that happened when I was a kid. My dad was a volunteer firefighter and got a call while barbecuing on the patio. He took off to the station and left my mom to finish up the burgers. Often he would be back in just a few minutes depending on how the call went. We also lived in a small, rural community and field burning was very common. This resulted in a lot of false alarms or small responses, so he likely figured he'd be back just in time to eat. Turns out this one was out of control and he would be gone for the rest of the day. It also turned out that my mom did not know how to turn off, or even turn down my dad's homemade gas grill. I did, but I was miles away at the creek or something. Unfortunately, in her efforts to turn it down, she turned it up and it proceeded to get hotter and hotter and the flames quite tall. She was worried, and what could she do? She called the fire department and a second crew came out to the house to turn off the BBQ. The penalty for a firefighter's house being the subject of a call was bringing a case of beer to the next drill and a certain amount of shame. TLDR, while fighting a field fire, my dad's firefighter buddies had to come to our house to turn off his BBQ. Years ago, friend of mine was a dispatcher for the county. He covered sheriff, EMS and fire communications, and also worked with communicating with other agencies as well. From the state troopers, he got some sort of text communication, not a phone text. This was before that was a thing, and it referred to an accident with injuries at the intersection of I-40 and Business 85. Something along the lines of collision I-40 bus 85 injuries involved. The way it was abbreviated and written made him misread it. Instead of an accident at 85 Business, he thought there was a bus collision on I-40, with 85 people injured. He dispatched every damn fire truck and ambulance the county had. They show up and it's at a car wreck with minor injuries. Edit, wasn't actually I-40, but I can't remember which highway it was. Somewhere in Davidson. I know the bus 85 part is right though. Lol, that is unfortunate for him but hilarious imagining the holy shit moment he will have had from reading it. Not an officer, but I'll share one of my buddies. He was an older gent who has passed on now, but if Reddit had been a thing when he was younger, this would have been a top tifu. When he was still new, he worked in a larger city. They had just gotten the shoulder mics. You know, the ones every cop has now mounted up by their mouth so they can call in easier. When new to them, they wore the cord in front of their shirts. Always in the damn way. And great handles when people wanted to wrestle. Jimmy was called one night to a bar brawl. He strolled into the bedlam almost over. He was a rookie, always getting the shit detail, so he was becoming famous among his department for ruining his uniforms. To the point he was having to come out of pocket to replace them. He walked into a vet telling him to cuff everyone still here, they'll sort them out later. Jimmy grabs the closest guy, they struggle a little and go down to the ground. As they do, Jimmy splits his pants clean up the backside. Knowing he's going to be the butt of jokes anyway, he turns his head to announce to the other officers, well, that's another uniform down. And keys his mic. Base here's uniform down. So does everyone else in the county. The radio explodes with chatter, but the 3 cops at the bar already had their hands full, so they turned down their radios. FU number 2. Base decided to roll everything with lights to the scene. Jimmy said they were glad of the help when the first few cars rolled up, but they just kept coming. He was known as Jack the Radio Ripper till he transferred. Minor reprimand and he still had to pay for the pants. I am not a police officer, but I watched this happen. Our local school has a spring festival that's a big fundraiser for us. The local police have been extremely supportive, and always send out a VW bug painted in police colors. The officer they send is great with kids and an excellent ambassador for the force. So, bright sunny spring day, kids milling around, carnival atmosphere. I'm walking with my friends, one eye on my kids. My friends have their non-verbal autistic son close by, since it's a lot of stimulus. He loves the police car. Sirens, lights, it's awesome. Officer McFriendly crouches down to eye level as the boy is sitting in the car. The boy turns to him and offers a high five, landing his hand on the officer's radio. More precisely, on the officer down panic button. Like the doleful eye of Sauron, every cop in range turns to converge on the schoolyard. The officer realizes what's happening and manages to wave off the imminent hot takedown of a pre-schooler, but I must say there was genuine fear in his eyes. Former cop here. The all units call was basically a riot at a large nightclub in a very rough area of the neighboring city. Once things were finally calmed down and the dozen or so people were taken away and my boss wanted us all back in our city, I was amazed at not only how many cops showed up but from where. Counties and towns I had never heard of before. I looked up a few at the end of shift and some came from an hour plus away. So, I interned at the local PD at a time when all stations received new radio devices. The new devices looked a bit like old cell phones and had a bright orange panic button on top. It was meant for situations where, for example, a single police officer was attacked and needed help. Pushing that button resulted in all communication on the standard channel 1 being turned to one-way communication only, so all units would listen to what's going on wherever the panic button was pressed, and an automatic all 3 units call. All other units had to switch to the much weaker channel 2 to communicate, but channel 2 only allowed one device to speak. So either dispatch or car 1 or car 2 etc. could talk, but not multiple people at the same time like on channel 1. To disable the panic mode, you had to push the bright orange button in a certain way. Think of holding it for 3 seconds followed by 4 quick pushes. It could not be done remotely. This happened in a rather large city where some police stations are closed at night, usually the ones in the suburbs where few calls come in. That night, an older PO closed down the remotest station in the suburbs, and decided to shut off the radio devices. You guessed it, he pushed the panic button on top because he thought that's where the devices were to be turned on and off, without realizing what he did. He locked the station and went home. Since it was the first day of using the new radio devices, quite a few officers were unsure how to turn to channel 2. Basically, all communication was blocked. Cue panic everywhere with frantic cell phone calls to dispatch, and dispatch trying to figure out who closed that station, and thus had one of the only keys to open it, so the panic mode could be disabled. This unintentional all units call turned into an actual no units can call, though quite a few units were busy trying to resolve the situation. Good intentions but horrendously poor execution on the radio maker's part. Police dispatcher here. Usually these happen whenever an officer screams for help or when there are calls for a shooting in progress or something else high priority that requires a perimeter setup. Recently there was a pursuit stand off on the interstate that had a lot of officers on scene. IMGA, the magic of the internet web page. News link W20 images. Richmond web page. Number 1. News article. Sorry, this content is not available in your region. Web page. Former Royal Canadian Mounted Police here in a small tourist town. Was working on a regular, mid-weekday shift when we received a dispatched call for a bomb threat, in the industrial commercial sector of the town. We all went there, called in the bomb squad, the dogs, got people out of the area, and so on. We were doing roadside when we got another call that the local bank's silent alarm was turned on. Now, we are in Canada, in a tourist town. Things are usually relatively calm. But this was absolutely chaotic. We got the all-unit call. They call our neighboring detachment to help. We all split and head to the bank. We arrive, around 20 some patrol cars all around, there to see all bank employees bounded and gagged, smoke everywhere from smoke bombs. We realize very quickly that the bomb threat was the diversion. We immediately got a bolo out to get the 3 males, identified by the bank staff, including a former bank employee. We get the bolo out to CPIC, got words to airports and border crossings. We managed to catch 2/3 of the guys. The last one flew back to his home country, was in Canada on a student visa. We remained on high alert for days after this, looking for the third guy. Canadian authorities worked with their colleagues from the other guy's country to get him extradited almost a year later. In the end, as I recall, about $130,000 were missing and never recovered. For most of us, it was the first time we had a bomb threatened or a robbery. First time we were guarding an area, expecting to be shot at from an unknown location. The robbers were reported to have AK-47 type looking weapons. Edit 1. Bolo. Be on the lookout for CPIC, Canadian Police Information Center. Edit 2. Changed deported by extradited. NB. I won't name the town or the country involved. I'm Canadian myself, just wanted to let you know it never occurred to me that an RCMP officer would even know Reddit, let alone have an account and speak on it. I am surprisingly giddy. Usually about once a month or so. We're taught that if you need backup, if shit's hitting the fan, call it in and worry about how many people come later. A unit was on patrol 2 weeks ago and some guy just started shooting at him. All the unit got out was 34th Saint. 10-33 I'm taking fire. 10-33 being the code for send the cavalry officer in need of assistance. It all ended fine. We caught the guy, no injuries, but you better believe every officer in our area dropped what they were doing and went. Another recent one, a mini riot broke out at a candle vigil for a murder victim. An officer stepped in alone, bad move, to stop the fight, and started getting his ass handed to him. All he said was Potomac. 10-33 but it worked. We came in, dispersed the crowd, and got out. Edit. Good chance to rant about a pet peeve of mine. When a 1033 goes out, there are always a few units who block the air with useless chatter. Hold me responding what's their location dispatcher, I'll come back to my current assignment later. Do they need a rifle on scene? It drives me crazy. Get off the radio and leave the air clear for the unit fighting for their lives. And every unit not on something absolutely necessary is required to respond. Why would you waste time to say you're going? No shit, you're going. I remember listening to an episode of This American Life where an officer accidentally locked himself in the back of his car when he went to take a nap. He left his radio in the front, so he called dispatch and was like, "Don't make this a big thing, just send one unit to me." And then dispatch proceeded to call out the code 4 officer down. So then he heard a bunch of cars put on their sirens and race to him. I got run over by someone fleeing the scene of an incident that they weren't involved in. He just got scared and apparently had a gun on him. I was out of my car talking to the person who called and my partner was trying to stop the person who was really called on, so he didn't even see me get hit. No one knew I got it or where I was because my radio went flying. Luckily there was a lot of witnesses who called 911 and found my radio. I confused the dispatcher because I was in so much shock that I came over radio taking like I normally do, but I was bleeding badly from my head and broke my leg. I didn't feel the pain for about 2 hours. So I had that call come out because of me. I'm also pretty sure a policy got made because of me too. As the story goes in Duluth, MN, for a long time the radio signal that available officers could meet for Dunkin' Donuts was the code word Broken Arrow. One day a non-Jaluthian was in the local newsroom when this was overheard. He got alarmed and told the rest of the newsroom that the code word likely meant that the police station was at that moment overwhelmed and outgunned, and they were calling all available units to help. Reporters rushed to the scene to find donuts. That code word is no longer used. Edit, spelling. Happens all the time. Officer S. in a fight. Possible subject with a gun. Major traffic accident. It's not anything like the movies. If it's a big enough incident, all your available units are going to be going. I called 911 a couple weeks ago because there was a couple involved in a domestic at a gas station, and I heard the phrase, "Give me the knife." Relayed all info I could to the dispatcher, and not even 5 minutes later 2 village police units and 4 deputy sheriffs rolled up. Guns out, yelling at the dude. Thought I was about to watch this dude get shot. This was probably around midnight. I wouldn't be surprised if those 4 deputies were all the units on duty that night. I work as a police communicator at a local university. Usually an all units call is a fire alarm at one of the buildings. However, most of the time it's a false alarm and someone just burnt the popcorn at the lounge. Till police officers fucking love burnt popcorn enough to send all units. Obligatory, not a cop. But I once got a all unit call to my house. Backstory: my mom was dating a meth head and everyone knew who he was. And our address. I was around 15 and one night he went off the rails and was beating the shit out of my mom. I got involved just in time to see him swing at my sister, who was 7 at the time. I ran for the phone and called it in. I got as far as the address when he grabbed me by the neck and threw me. Well, the dispatcher heard my garbled yelp and called it in as a possible homicide in progress. That, combined with his reputation, sent every single cop in the surrounding jurisdictions came flying our way. By the end of it I think there was 20 plus police officers at our house. I ended up hitting him with my mom's cast iron skillet to keep him there just as the first officer showed up. He was super cool about it and pretended he didn't see a thing. It was a terrible night and my mom was mad at me for months. But man, you don't fuck with my little sister. We have calls almost daily that kind of meet this requirement. We have patrol sectors, each with a 2-man cruiser and a 1-man cruiser. The 2-man cars handle the high priority calls and the 1-man cars handle the more mundane stuff. So when a call comes in like shots fired, both sector cars go and usually other sector cars start radioing in that they are also responding. I do remember one night at midnight, which is shift change, we had a 2-man unit that shot a guy who pulled out a gun on them. You could hear gunshots over the radio and the car calling for help. The dispatcher kinda stumbled a bit, then said everybody go, everybody go. When a dispatcher messes up like that, do they get in some sort of trouble? Or do the higher ups just let it go? Might not have been an all units call, but the day my daughter went unresponsive after having a febrile seizure, the 911 dispatcher sent out unresponsive 2-year-old and we had about 30 EMT, police, firefighters, at our house in minutes. We live in a rural area, short distance from fire hall, ambulance hall, and everyone is a member EMT. Thankfully, she was okay, but it was scary for us at the moment when her temperature wouldn't go down and then she passed out. Was a military police officer on a rather large base. I was getting off shift and being transported back to my barracks by the guys coming on shift so I could check in my weapon. Suddenly we got a call for all units to respond to a section of base housing. A military wife was having an affair with another soldier while her husband was on deployment. Supposedly the husband was due to return soon, so she tried to break it off with the other guy. He responded by stabbing her several times. My team leader and I searched the tree line with our weapons drawn, cause he's armed and it's dark outside, Yano. I actually passed the guy with my team leader a few yards behind me and suddenly he comes out saying you're looking for me. Scared the shit out of me. My team leader covered him while I went in for the handcuffing, making sure that I had mine firmly planted in between his shoulder blades and thoroughly covering his upper torso into the muddy terrain. Not sure what happened after that. He was taken to a holding cell by another squad and I got to go home. Ended up getting transferred from that base a few months later, but I know the wife survived the wounds. He comes out saying you're looking for me. Detective. Too many examples. London riots, unit attacked with a machete, large group fighting with knives, building fires, so on and so forth. Happened to my dad when he was stationed overseas. There was an airshow disaster in Germany and he was already there, so he was one of the first to respond. He struggles from it still. Fireworks and barbecues remind him of the smell of burning flesh that day. Not cop, but hopefully relevant. I was at one of the lakefront beaches in Chicago a few summers ago when, according to news report later, a party 1/4 mile down the trail started getting out of hand. Apparently party got way overcrowded, so a pair of cops rolled up in a squad car to get the mariachi band to quit, in hopes of folks losing interest and dispersing. This was a no-go and crowd responded by, among other things, breaking the squad car windows and surging in around the cops, one of whom put out an "oh shit" call. I don't know the details, but apparently Chicago cops have a code that basically means drop whatever you're doing and get the fuck over here, because within 90 seconds Wilsonave looked, I shit you not, like that epic car chase at the end of the Blues Brothers. If I had to guess, must have been at least 50 cars hauling ass down onto the lakefront, one after the other. Like a high-speed parade of cop cars celebrating "we're gonna fuck you up then arrest everybody day." Which, basically, it was. My dad was a PAPD officer for 30 years. 2 times he had all units calls. First was the 1993 WTC bombing. The second was the 9th of November 2001. If he didn't pass away from an illness related to his time at the WTC site in 01, he'd be able to convey his impressions of that day better than I could. I recently found his handwritten notes from that night. They were jumbled together on his notepad and placemats from a diner in the area. Edit, whoever gilded my comment. Thank you. I would urge you to put those notes together and see about publishing them online. I really love history and 9/11 is going to be one of those things that people are going to be talking about for the next couple hundred years. First-hand accounts are vital, so I'd really encourage you to put those notes together. Not a cop but former practicing journalist, current PR person. Got a text about a shooting. Turned out a cop made a stop. Got shot in the neck by the passenger. Killed the passenger and shot the driver. Driver got away. Cops from the 2 adjoining cities came. Sheriff's deputies, airport police, and university police all came out in under 3 minutes. About 150 cops. Within 30 minutes, marshals, FBI, and ATF were there as well. Largest response I've ever seen. There were rounds that had been fired into the buildings surrounding the area. It was a mess. I was in the wrong place at the right time, I guess. Last story I ever did. Made the full-time switch to PR. Edit, the cop survived. My father was a highway federal officer, Federal de Caminos, rough translation, here in Mexico. They were armed with light machine guns of standard caliber because shit goes real against the cartels here in the northern border, but it's so big and spaced out you have to deal with it yourself cause the nearest unit can be 1+ hour away and they have reinforced trucks. Anyway, he once told me that he encountered a convoy of 3 Humvees while he was on the side of the road relatively hidden. He opened fire at the first Humvee's tires and it loses control. The other 2 brake and like 12 dudes with Kalashnikovs come out to fire in random directions they probably didn't saw where they got shot from. And my father lays down suppressing fire on them until 2 units come from each side of the road from a relatively nearby station to arrest what's left of them. Holy shit, your dad's gotta be some type of badass to be patrolling for fucking cartel members. Never a policeman, but I used to work in the security industry. I was quite well known by the local officers and had quite a few dealings with them, both in and out of work. One day I got a call on my mobile phone while on duty. Bit odd. It was the local custody sergeant. Apparently there had been a call that a child was being attacked in some woodland next to my site. I was being asked to run to the site of the report as I would be there first, a good 2 or 3 minutes in front of the police. I went, and pretty soon was scouring this little woods for anyone I could find. The whole time shitting myself. What if I find someone doing something to a kid? What do? I probably shouldn't kill him. Could I not? Could I just frighten him off the kid and take control there? Would I be able to control my anger? All those thoughts happened in a flash, plus more. I did a few frantic laps of this place before hearing cars pulling up behind me, outside the wood. Next thing, there was the entire local police force in there with me. We never found anyone. No sign. Horrible moment. Also, the first and only cavalry charge I've ever seen was in Brooklyn. There was this ride on W12 and Bowery in Coney Island in the late 80s called the Polar Express. You've all seen it. It's that ride that goes real fast around, then it goes backwards while blasting real loud music. Stupid, but whatever. This also attracted every brokies in Brooklyn who couldn't afford to get into a club, or were thrown out of all of them, on weekends, and it was always a freaking nightmare. There were always fights, but you learned to let them tire themselves out a bit before you waded in because things could get ugly. I was detailed to this thing with a small army of other rookie cops on 4th of July weekend. We were told in no uncertain terms not to go into the crowd. Ever. Nothing is happening in there that's worth your safety. So of course a brawl breaks out and someone immediately goes running in. Now, please understand, you have to go now. You can't leave the other guy alone, even if he did fuck up. The crowd parts for us like Moses parting the Red Sea, and then it closes in on us and the airmail, rocks and bottles, come sailing. We pretty much go back to back ALA 300, but we are vastly outnumbered and inebriated. We are fighting our way out and there's backup trying to fight its way in to get to us, but it's taking time, and I don't know if you've ever literally fought for your life, but it is fucking tiring. That adrenaline jolt only buys you so much time. Then I saw it, a flying wedge formation of mounted charging down West 12th into the crowd at full speed with the sergeant in the middle with his nightstick held out like he was ordering a charge and a shit-eating grin that said he had waited his entire life for this. I think the horse was smiling, too. You'll hear the term crash a lot and it's hyperbole. Not here. No, these guys crashed into this riot and sent bodies flying everywhere, like the bow of a great warship cutting through a stormy sea. A blue, black leather and drone battleship. The crowd dispersed in about 3 minutes flat, equally as stunned by what they just saw as honest Leatherfoot cops were. I know sometimes people bitch about the cost of maintaining mounted police units because they're seen as a necessary backdrop for tourist photos, and oh my god, I am living proof that they are so much more valuable than that. Buddy's first day on the phone at a fire station in an international airport. Airliner detects a fire in the rear by the generator. They are coming in hot and need assistance immediately. Buddy decides a major airliner incident is imminent. Calls the city fire department, which might have 80 fire stations. They all send every unit, expecting complete mayhem. Airplane lands safely. False alarm. 200 fire trucks are lined up for miles outside the airport. No one was able to get in because the gate was closed. My rookie friend botched his all units call. Edit, it was a false alarm. Not sure if that's clear. Former military police here. Air Force Security Forces, to be specific. I was patrolling base housing doing some LA training. I had been on station less than a year, and we heard a gunshot. We called it in immediately, and started heading in the direction we heard it from. Those houses were duplexes, and the neighbors called it in as well. BDOC, dispatch, sent us, another police unit, and then the entire external response force. This was on a nuke base, So even things that don't actually have any impact on the nuclear mission totally have an impact on the nuclear mission. We had 19 total people on scene within about 3 minutes. As the first ones on scene, my post leader and I were already at the door when the rest of them showed up. I was thankful for them showing up when they did, because we were about to breach the door and go in just the two of us. We were told to hold for 30 seconds while the RF team got set up. Now we had a full stack and breaching equipment. I made a fist and thumped my helmet, signaling the breacher, who came up with his Halligan tool. My leader was number 2 in the stack, so she had to throw the flashbang. One of the RF guys passed it up from somewhere in the back of the stack, and as soon as the breacher had the door open, she tossed it in. All it did was scare the shit out of the dog. Only the husband was home, as his wife was deployed. He was sitting in the dining room on a chair with an SKS in his lap. I was maybe a pound or so of pressure away from pulling the trigger on my rifle when I realized that this dude's head was not fully intact. The SKS was only in his lap because the sling got caught on his arm after he pulled the trigger. As we cleared out the rest of the house, per procedure, I had my non-firing hand basically stuffed in my mouth to stop myself from puking. The dude's wife had sent him pictures and video of her cheating on him multiple times, and telling him she wanted a divorce. He thought there was no other way out, so he shot himself. The only good news from that day is that we actually had picture and video evidence to use to charge her with adultery. OC, like an Air Force version of the FBI, pulled her out of her deployment and got her back on station, and we charged her with everything we could, including Articles 92, 107, 125 which covers sodomy, and 134. She was stripped of all rank, forfeited all pay, went to confinement, and was dishonorably discharged after her 11 years of service. Edit, the neighbors adopted the dog. He was a good boy and nobody wanted to see him go to the pound. Edit, if you are feeling like hurting yourself or someone else, please reach out for help. You aren't alone, and you don't deserve to feel like it. Call someone, text someone, DM someone. Whatever. Just reach out. Nobody needs to suffer alone. Cheers. Edit. Adultery and sodomy are both illegal under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. I did not create said manual for courts martial, though I, as with all personnel, am required to abide by it. I know that making blowjobs and butt stuff illegal is archaic, but it is what it is. Also, don't cheat on your spouse. End the relationship properly if you can't hold up your end of the bargain, or they aren't holding up theirs. Cheers. Eli 5 What's the deal with adultery charges and US military? What does the employer have to do with its employee private life and marriage? One that stands out was a chase which ended with a crash. 3 dead people and a trunk full of guns and drugs, but there's robberies, pursuit assists, and man with gun calls, all of which usually get opened up depending on the situation. And always, officer down, or needs immediate assistance, 10-24, if you're close especially. They hit that button or shots start going off, I'm dropping everything, grabbing my 416 and traveling light speed and coming in with everything I got. I'm not a police officer, but back when I was a reporter, I had to write up a fun little story for the paper. The local university had a Greek week in which all the frats and sororities would compete for charity. At the end of the week they'd gather together and carpool over to the local drive-in. Normally the campus required any gathering of more than a dozen or so people be registered so that they could send an officer to monitor for underage drinking. But because this wasn't an official party, no one bothered to tell the campus police. The plan was to go elsewhere. Sure enough, the neighbors complained about an unauthorized party as there were maybe a few dozen kids milling about loading up for the carpool. So a couple of the campus police were sent over to move the kids along. When they get there, there's kids everywhere and they are talking shit to cops. They thought it was ridiculous that someone called the cops on a carpool. One of the officers then slipped on a beer bottle while walking to the frat house. But his partner didn't see why he had fallen. He heard a crash and sees his senior partner on the ground. Thinking his partner had been hit by a thrown bottle, he rushed over to the cruiser and called in for backup. But he was relatively green and made several little mistakes. Instead of using normal language he decided to use codes. Instead of saying, "Hey, we're clearing out that unauthorized party and could use a couple more officers," he used the codes for riot in progress, officers down on the scene, need immediate backup, and instead of using the campus police only band, they use the shared county band. Well, riot in progress, officers down, is apparently something dispatchers take a little seriously. An all units call was then immediately repeated by the 4 adjacent counties plus most of the individual cities and towns. Ultimately a couple hundred cars screamed their way to campus. Cooler heads eventually prevailed, but not until a few hundred cops from about a dozen departments had donned their anti-riot gear, fired tear gas into a crowd that had no idea that they were rioting, and had detained everyone in a 2-block radius. Without realizing or intending to, the rookie had summoned nearly every officer in a 50-mile radius. A friend of mine was a K9 cop with a local small police department. He was a solid guy but, by his own admission, wasn't the brightest. As an example, he couldn't learn the German commands for the dogs, so they had to teach the dog English. Anyway, one day an all call or whatever it's called came in. It was regarding a shooting, which is rare here. My friend was taking a dump at the time and his dog was in his SUV K9, mobile. The cops went running out and jumped in whatever car was available. The K9 was in the back seat. When some other cop jumped in the SUV, the K9 got spooked and clamped down on the cop's neck. He freaked out and started screaming into his radio. All the other cops thought he'd arrived at the scene and been shot. My friend, hearing on the radio and knowing how his dog acts, ran out of the bathroom pulling his pants up. Havoc ensued. If I were a cop, I'd want to work for a small police department. Not a police officer, but I had an incident where 20 police cars were in my neighborhood the day my mom passed away. They wouldn't let us see her until after the autopsy came back and she had a heart attack. My entire house was filled and it was a decent sized house. One was sitting in my gaming chair looking through things. Like, dude, you're not gonna find anything on a 14-year-old girl's desk. It was around 9 AM when I found her, and by the time they all left it was close to 11 PM. TLDR, my mom died and police stayed for almost 14 hours. Our calls are a little different. Mostly rescues, but we'll sometimes fall in with the local police departments. Once got called for a dirt bike accident on a trail. Story starts out that kid's broken up bad, lost, can't get out of the trail. It's a 7-mile trail and only wide enough for one ATV to get through at a time. All traffic goes one way. None of us live that way, so none of us have a bike with us. And I'm the only one who's ridden the trail. I'm headed to the trailhead while I'm listening to the radio traffic. Thinking to myself, you dumb motherfuckers. It's going to be at least 4 hours before we find and drag this kid out of there. Why the hell are you calling in the helicopter? There is no landing zone and they aren't going to wait 4+ hours for you. Local search and rescue fucking shit up. They'll be on IV fluids within the hour. Helicopter flies through. Then leaves. Like, big surprise. There. Word gets out that another group riding got the kid and are taking him to the highway. Group actually rides through to the end of the trailhead. Kid's fine. Nothing broken but his bike. He had earbuds on inside his helmet. When he went down he hit his head hard enough to break off both of the earbuds inside his ears. And I'll never wear earbuds inside my helmet. I was off for this one, but the original call is too good. Dispatch calls saying there's an alligator eating a person on the river. This is pretty big, and one of our worst fears. It'll impact how we manage alligators from then on. We've got to get out there, catch and kill a 12+ featuring alligator and recover a body that no one's reported missing. So they all scramble to get a boat in the water before this thing leaves and goes to sleep for 2 weeks with a full belly and the half-eaten body sinks, and no amount of dragging or side sonar will help find it in the flooded river. Other agencies are getting out there too. They find the alligator. It's eating a dog. So now these guys are cutting up about it. And out of nowhere they notice a freaking body floating in the river. Turns out some guy ran from highway patrol days before, tried to cross the river, drown, and happened to float up at exactly the right time. I did get to catch the dog eater though. Fucker made the paper. In all honesty, I think the couple who originally made the call accidentally drowned their pet when the river flooded and the alligator found the carcass later. They were guilt-ridden and needed a scapegoat for their ignorance. And 2 alligators died for it. Because of the media, we were forced to remove one. We knew there's no realistic way to get the one who actually ate the dog, so we just had the trapper set a line and remove the first gator over 8 feet that took the bait. As soon as you remove one, another shows up, so this couple sees another big gator and raises hell that we didn't catch the right one. So we set a line for the next one. Comes out just over 11 feet. We're like, for the love of God, just don't see another alligator, people. In between these 2, I was out with a partner looking for the dog killer. We mostly hook them on rod and reel. Based on the pictures and location we found it, we hooked into it and knew immediately that we would never catch it. This fucker pulled an 18-foot boat up a flooded river like it was soggy newspaper. Had us dipping so low we were worried about capsizing. Swam under a log and we kept fighting till the line finally broke. After being under for well over 45 minutes, this thing pops up like 15 feet from us and crawls up onto a fallen tree and sandbar. Starts huffing, trying to get some oxygen back. We're just stunned staring at it like we just pissed off the Lake Placid monster and it's coming for revenge. My partner's been doing this for many years and he says this is the largest gator he's ever seen. The thing was over 13 foot and was still partially submerged. Coloration matched the picture of the dog eater better. This was it, and he's staying on this planet for a while longer. I served in West Belfast, Northern Ireland. Due to the high threat level in my division, we would patrol in 2 ex-armored Land Rovers, each with minimum 3 armed officers, one of which would have an assault rifle or SMG. Basically, we could handle most scenarios. One day, however, our vehicle was in an intentional head-on collision with a stolen car, as it was driving towards local children playing in the street. This resulted in our front wheel arch bending to the point the vehicle could travel no more. In a few minutes, the community we were there to protect turned against us. It was like Black Hawk Down. A few hundred people came out of the woodwork when they realized we were an easy target. Petrol bombs and bricks rained on top of us as we attempted to pursue the car thief on foot. We jumped in the back of our vehicle and called for assistance. In under 5 minutes, a fleet of approximately 5 to 6 armored Land Rovers appeared from the neighboring division and drove the crowd back. They managed to tow us to safety and we lived to get bricked another day. Corrections here. When I was first on the job, I was doing an overtime shift in the maximum security unit. It was my Friday, 1 hour to go, and my birthday weekend at that. At 1400, while counting the minutes, a call comes out on the radio. Central Control, activate IMS. Housing Unit 3, inmate is refusing to cuff up and has broken the fire sprinklers in his cell. Requesting a team response. Put B. Team on standby. IMS is code for locking down everything. When you hear an IMS call, that means every inmate that is not in a cell must be secured. It's serious shit because when an event like this occurs, other officers must leave their respective posts to assist, which means officers that remain on their units while their counterparts assist are now even more outnumbered, and that can easily spiral out of control. In short, any event like this is a serious security threat. In this case, Max was put on lockdown while the rest of the institution kept about their business. Interesting thing is, when an IMS comes out for Max, the collective prison sphincter cinches up a bit because Max is where the real violent shit goes down. An A team is always the first to respond. But the kicker with this one was the command to put the B team on standby. This means shit has hit the fan and anyone not immediately supervising inmates would be required to respond if so commanded. A B team deployment to Max would send the rest of the 7,000 bed institution into a complete lockdown. All doctor appointments, visits, movement throughout the buildings is completely locked down. You'd hear Sally Port doors slamming shut everywhere. Really cool to experience it honestly. There's also C, D, and E teams. If those were ever called, well, it shouldn't ever get to that point. Anyway, being the new guy, I was elected to respond. When I arrived at the briefing area, we were immediately ordered to put on our riot gear and biohazard coveralls. Other officers helped us suit up so no skin was exposed. Only being a few weeks out of the academy, I did shit myself. This was not only my first A-team response, but it was also a biohazard. Blood, semen, urine, shit. Which is it, Sergeant? All of them. I don't believe in Jesus, but I did briefly for that moment. When we were escorted onto the unit, it was a war zone. The entire housing unit was full of gas, fire alarms blaring, red lights flashing everywhere. Even though we had our gas masks on, it didn't help as we had to put them on in a hurry. The first responding officers had to go in without any protective gear. The motherfucker was still in his cell. He had been gassed, maced, and hosed. He was unrelenting. I thought, he's gotta be on PCP. Then I remembered this is maximum. Nothing gets in or out. The inmate was ass naked, covered in God knows what. Screaming unintelligibly. He was bleeding from his arms due to having bitten full chunks out of them. His cell was watered down from the sprinklers and from getting sprayed with any number of OC variants. The best part, this man, in all his naked splendor and rage, was 120% erect. The fullest boner you've ever seen. Something deep inside his primordial mind had gotten irrevocably turned on through all this. Even his penis being exposed to OC spray did nothing to stop it. We stack up in a line. 4 cell breaches, 6 of us would line up in a stick. The guy on point always had the shield. 2-5 had the cuffs. The last guy was the moderator. He or she would give the inmate a final opportunity to comply, because the pain was fucking coming. Inmate, this is your last opportunity to approach the door and cuff up. Do you comply? Of course not. When this inmate saw us line up, however, something changed, as if the Holy Spirit spoke to him. He cuffed up, was dragged out of his cell, still erect BTW, and thrown into a shower. I didn't even get to breach the cell. The sight of 6 officers in full riot gear lining up outside your door, and you knowing full well they're gonna find a way to all fit in your cell in less than 3 seconds, can be a really humbling experience. The end. Edit. Sorry for the letdown of a conclusion. The reality of these situations is that we have to contain the threat. There are only 2 outcomes, containment or people getting hurt, killed. I highly recommend the HBO documentary Gladiator Days YouTube webpage, which depicts the outrageous violence at the institution I served at. Since this is getting somewhat upvoted, I want to draw attention to the absolute bullshit the men and women in blue have to put up with. Yes, there's bad apples. And yes, they ruin it for the rest of us. But for the vast majority, we derive a strong sense of duty from our jobs. That duty helps us get through the sad human condition we have to mop up regularly. Having worked in a prison, I was tasked with the direct supervision of society's worst, the monsters, the folks you hear about on the news and ask, how could someone do that to another person? To a baby. We have to ensure they're fed, healthy, receiving correspondence, going to dental medical appointments, getting the religious services they need, bathing, sleeping, etc. And all that while knowing exactly what they did to land themselves in this situation. There are reports called pre-sentence investigations that detail, in absolute grotesque, explicit detail, the crimes these people committed. This is the stuff the news doesn't report because the public couldn't handle it. Not only that, it details their upbringing, which can be equally disturbing and just fucking sad. You see how their upbringing led them to their current plight, and somehow, you have to professionally wade through knowing these things and treat them with as much dignity and respect as possible. It taxes you like nothing most have experienced. Sorry for the soapbox. Late to the thread, but here goes. As with most, not a police officer, I was a boarding officer in the USCG many moons ago. Typical 4-man boat crew on a USCG 41 feet. Early one morning on a normal harbor patrol, I notice a 75 feet motor yacht illegally anchored. Given the ship traffic coming and going in the pre-dawn light, it was totally unsafe, so I radioed station and they advised we make contact. I grabbed the searchlight and illuminated the yacht, and when I lit up the guy sleeping on the aft deck in a chair, as soon as my light hit him, he bounced up and ran inside. If only he hadn't done that. This prompted our boat driver at the time to overreact, slamming the throttles forward, hitting the siren lights, and saying repeatedly over the loudspeaker, "This is the United States Coast Guard. Prepare to be boarded." Of course, now everyone's adrenaline is flowing, and what was just an illegal anchoring situation was now, in the mind of these other three guys, the world's biggest drug bust about to go down. See, the ship had a Mexican registry. So we come alongside and immediately, make the determination that the ship is too large to be boarded at sea by a 4-man crew, so we escort them back to station. This is the all units call part. By the time we get back to station, every single member of my unit plus every crew member on the larger cutters that tied up at the station were all on deck watching. There was another military base nearby with a large police force, so their police were on scene along with the local sheriff's department K9 unit, US Customs, D, and some guys in suits whose affiliation I never was able to figure out. Probably FBI or CGI, who knows? This was literally all hands on deck. A preliminary search of the vessel found a very small quantity of marijuana in the bedside table of the master cabin. There were 3 generations of a Mexican family enjoying their vacation, and it looked like mom and dad might have enjoyed a joint or two in the evenings back in their cabin. That's what it looked like to me. To everyone else it looked like the reincarnation of Pablo Escobar. They ripped that yacht apart in the name of space accountability, when the overall outside measurement is greater than the total of all the inside compartment measurements, leading one to believe there may be hidden compartments, false bulkheads, etc. They even ripped up the decks with saws, thinking there may be something stashed along the keel pipes. As a lowly E3, pretty fresh out of boot camp, my part in all of this was armed guard for the family. I stood there with a Beretta 92F on my side and an M16 in my hands, guarding grandma, grandpa, mom, dad, and the 3 kids. And as I stood there watching their boat be ripped to shreds over the discovery of a couple of joints, I asked myself, was I real as opposed to shoot them if they tried to run or escape? Over a couple of joints and being illegally anchored. The illegal anchoring that I noticed and brought to everyone's attention. I discovered later this boat was not on any of our watch lists, and no one ever did find anything. The boat stayed tied up in a nearby marina for a couple months and then just disappeared one day. I'm not sure whatever became of the boat or the family, but I hope they are well. I'll never forget that day. I had such guilt and such remorse for what those poor people endured, that I became very disenchanted with my choice to join. I loved the search and rescue part of the CG's mission, and I have some great memories of some truly good deeds I got to do for many people. But the law enforcement part stuck in my craw, and I was choking on it. So when our wonderful US Congress failed to come up with a budget and we shut down the government briefly, the chief walked into Morning Muster one day and said, "Anyone want out? Come to my office at 1100 hours today for processing to the inactive ready reserve." It was like a dream come true. I got everything I needed out of my time in service, and I did some good while I was there. But never again would I find myself hovering over the elderly and children with an automatic weapon, or ruining someone's day vacation property life for a couple of joints, and for that I am eternally grateful. Yup, lava erupted from a fissure in a subdivision in Puna on the Big Island in Hawaii. Interesting day. A cave volcano. This is the police. We got you surrounded. Stop what you're doing. No. Put that lava away. Okay, we're gonna need some backup. Not a police officer, but used to work corrections. An inmate decided to try and fight one of our newer guards. The inmate failed to realize he was a military policeman trained in hand-to-hand combat and just a good fighter. Lol, we watched it on the cameras quite a few times after. Yes. Whenever another cop calls for help on the radio, you drop whatever you're doing and bust your ass to their location. Not a police officer, but the person all units were focused on. My high school had an open campus, so some friends and I were at one of their houses a few blocks away for lunch one day. We were messing with an airsoft gun in his backyard, and some neighbor saw it and called the police thinking it was a real gun. We were ordered out of the house with a megaphone and swarmed by the SWAT team once we were all out. I'm talking 15 officers with full armor and assault weapons. Once I was on the ground, I looked around and saw 4 or 5 police cars parked across the street with snipers focused on us. We didn't end up getting in any trouble, because we didn't actually do anything wrong, but I think the response was justified based on the call and the concern over school shootings. Here, IMGA webpage, is the archived newspaper article on the incident. Edit, full article, IMGA webpage, for those that questioned the legitimacy. Remember a few years ago those bank robbers in full body armor who just walked around shooting up cops and turning their cars into Swiss cheese? Cop says to dispatch, "Officer down." Then another, "Officer down," then another, and dispatch says, "We got that," but cop says multiple officers down. It was chilling. I'm sure a Reddit sleuth could find it. 20 years ago, a dramatic North Hollywood shootout changed the course of the LAPD and policing at large. Los Angeles Times webpage. This happened in 1997. I once had all units called on me. I was riding a bicycle at night, and I didn't have a rear light. I actually did, but the battery died between when I left and when I got pulled over. I recently had an all-available units respond call for an unresponsive child. My partner and I have never driven so fast. When we got there, all you could smell was brakes and exhaust fumes from our cruisers. We entered the house and found the child. A 1-year-old boy. We performed CPR. He was transported. He didn't make it. It's hard to be criticized by the media and general public when these are the things we deal with. My house burned down 5 years ago. My sister attempted suicide twice. My brother died almost 8 years ago now when he was only 6 months. So much shit, but I have immense gratitude and appreciation for the officers and EMTs and firefighters that came and did everything that they could. There's a lot about corruption in the force, but you guys come when called and do so much. Thank you for saving my sister. Thank you for salvaging my house. Thank you for crying with my family. One time my friend and I had a single joint in the car, and I kid you not 6 squad cars and a K9 unit showed up. At some point I think their thoroughness was just a desperate attempt to save face. My uncle told me a story once about getting called on a code swordfish, which is a bit more serious than just all units. There was this coked up 6 featuring something huge guy who had just shot up a liquor store and was tearing down the interstate. He told us there were probably about 15 cop cars already tailing him when he caught up, with the state troopers leading. When he got onto the interstate he was practically right next to the guy. They ran his car off the road and the dude jumps out while it's still moving and runs across the interstate. He jumps over the guard rail and falls about 10 feet to the other side of the interstate, runs across that into the woods. The 2 state troopers got out as soon as they saw him running and took off after him with my uncle not far behind. One of them didn't realize how far the fall was and broke his ankle. The other chased down the guy. By the time my uncle got there, the other state trooper was staggered and about to pass out from how hard his ass got kicked. My uncle, without breaking his sprint, charged the guy and threw the heaviest haymaker he could. The guy went out immediately. Later, they had to go to the hospital to file reports since they had to take the guy in for the drug stuff. My uncle was sitting on a chair, with his hat over his hand in his lap. The doctor comes in and asks him how big of a flashlight did he hit the dude with. My uncle just lifts his hat and shows his bruised and swollen hand. Apparently he hit the guy so hard it fractured his temple and very nearly killed him. Not having a serious tag is basically the same as having a trolls PLS tag. Perhaps it would be a good idea to reverse it, untagged posts being seen as serious, and requiring a unserious tag for joke play posts. All unit calls are more common and less critical than movies would have you believe. What you may be referring to instead is a code swordfish. A memorable one a few years back was during a celebrity night. They were doing this charity event with a couple of famous personalities, amongst which was Helen Mirren. At around 2 AM a code swordfish is sent out and everyone rushes to the event. The scene was a coke-fueled bedlam of apocalyptic proportions. People screeching and tearing at each other's faces, a man biting into a live cat, a pool filled with foam, chlorine and offal. And in the middle of all this was Dame Mirren. She was riding bareback on a fat hairy man, slapping her thighs in excitement and screaming her head off. I never saw so much vigor and ecstasy in a single person. She was making this weird facial thing like a horse blowing raspberries and throwing loud wet farts after each one. We tased her, but she ran butt naked into the street, climbed a palm tree and swung away from tree to tree. We caught her a day later when the coke wore off and she crept into a local chicken farm to sleep.